Now it's time for On Point, where we speak to experts to delve deeper into the biggest news stories in the spotlight right now. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un recently marked his 10th year in power. A lot has changed in North Korea over the past decade, and his leadership, while arguably you could say touch and go at the start, has seemingly solidified in recent years. However, the North currently faces a myriad of challenges on almost every single front, not least a looming food crisis as we head into the most unforgiving period of the Korean Peninsula's notoriously frigid midwinter. On the international front, North Korea has been relatively quiet in terms of missile launches and such, and there have been no major provocations like an ICBM launch or nuclear tests in years now.
Perhaps taking the relative calm as their cue, China and Russia have teamed up, both permanent members of the UN Security Council, to try and press for a lifting of certain international sanctions imposed on North Korea. For more, we connect to Mark Barry, a North Korea expert and associate editor of the International Journal on World Peace. Good morning, Mark.
Good morning.
Now, why do you think Russia and China are pushing for the removal of sanctions on North Korea, considering the other members, the US, the UK, and France, would never agree and all have veto-wielding power? What's the real motive behind Beijing and Moscow making this move that's doomed to fail at this current time?
Well, from the point of view of Russia and China, they've been consistent over the last 30 years that the North Korean nuclear issue must be settled without confrontation. So they insist that North Korea has legitimate interests that must be respected, that the Kim regime should be treated as a partner for peace and not as an adversary. So you could say in hindsight that Russia and China are probably more right than wrong. And as both countries border on North Korea, they don't want to see regional instability in Northeast Asia. And by the way, of the five Security Council countries you mentioned, the United Kingdom has diplomatic relations with North Korea. But on the nuclear issue, they follow U.S. policy because non-proliferation alone, in my view, has taken on a higher value than resolving a state of war that has persisted since 1953.
Okay, so in your view then, do you think it is important that the international community maintains this kind of leverage it has, economically speaking, over North Korea through these sanctions to try and pressure the regime to meet its denuclearization commitments? And would you support, if it were to work, putting even tougher sanctions on the North to try and force their hand?
Well, I think that bilateral and UN sanctions in North Korea are maintained because, in the end, the United States has relied on military power and pressure rather than astute diplomacy since the collapse of the Soviet Union 30 years ago this month. In a sense, classic diplomacy in conflict resolution, you might say, is now a rarity. So sanctions today, in 2021, are a bargaining chip that the U.S. uses with North Korea. But I think there are three realities about sanctions on the North. Number one, the U.S., in the view of many experts, doesn't adequately enforce its own sanctions or UN sanctions. Secondly, China pays little heed to UN sanctions, except, of course, for it becoming much tougher during the fire and fury period of 2017. And thirdly, North Korea has found a multitude of ways to skirt sanctions. Ironically, as far as I understand it, the DPRK is not the most sanctioned nation around, but Iran is, followed by Russia. And moreover, North Korea has, in a sense, harmed itself far more in the last 2 years with its ironclad COVID lockdown than it has been hurt by U.S. and UN sanctions.
And Mark, let's focus more on the leader, Kim Jong-un. 10 years ago, at the age of 27, Kim Jong-un was North Korea's so-called, great successor. Fast forward to 2021, and the regime is in crisis, arguably poorer and possibly even more isolated than when he first took power. How do you assess Kim's decade as the leader of North Korea?
Well, it's interesting. I knew 3 Korean Americans who attended Kim Jong-il's funeral on December 28th, 2011. and they each personally expressed their condolences to Kim Jong-un. And I later got to see their photos of them with Kim. And Kim looked absolutely devastated, not only upon the death of his father, but I think at the sudden burden that had been thrust upon him at the young age of 27, with very little time to really ramp up and prepare. And many doubted that he'd make it beyond the first year or two, because successions are a fragile time for regimes that are dependent on a single absolute leader. So you could say Kim did what he thought he had to do to consolidate power, and none of the other leaders who accompanied the hearse at his father's funeral are either alive today or in power. So for the economy, Kim probably did more than he's been given credit for, and he did undertake bold initiatives with both President Moon and President Trump. But unfortunately today, Kim is still surrounded by the same old familiar problems.
Yeah, we remember that period of purges and executions that Kim went on in the early years of his reign. Perhaps if you'd taken a photo of the people who were friends with Kim Jong-il at that time, their face would have looked even more sad, considering they probably knew their fate at that point. But some experts say that Kim Jong-un is facing his toughest moment as leader yet. Got all these sanctions on the regime. There's the pandemic, of course, and what you labeled their own kind of shooting themselves in the foot in that regard. Then you got your food shortages and all the growing economic turmoil, and it's all coming together at once. Do you think that Kim and his top aides recognize something has to change, and very quickly, to ensure that he remains in such a powerful position in, say, another 10 years from now?
Yes, the existential question is, will the next 10 years be no better or even worse than the first 10? My own hunch is after the next South Korean president takes office, Kim will try to arrive at some kind of an accommodation with South Korea, because in my view, his only other choice may be a de facto Finlandization by China, in which China promises to greatly invest in the North's economy, but at the expense of North Korea's full independence and sovereignty. And Kim will never accede to that. So by accommodating with the South, Kim gains both political leverage against China and substantial economic support, theoretically, from South Korea. And if that occurs, the best U.S. response would be diplomatic recognition of North Korea after some kind of a tacit understanding about the ultimate disposition of the North's nuclear weapons program.
All right. Well, as always, Mark, thank you so much for making time and sharing your insights with us. We look forward to speaking to you again soon.
Okay, and happy holidays to both of you.
Thank you.